So hello everyone, welcome to the panel. If you are online, welcome. If you are here in front of us, welcome. This is the panel Bridging the Compute Divide, a Global Alliance for AI. And if you ask if the Global Alliance or a Global Alliance, I think it might be a Global Alliance and even many Global Alliances as long as we have this idea of Global Alliance. We'll introduce shortly the panel, and then I'll pass the words for 3 rounds of questions, and then we open for your comments. So let me explain why we believe we need a global alliance for AI. My name is Fabro Steibel. I'm Executive Director of ITS Rio, Institute for Technology and Society, and it's a civil society. Last year, on the topic of technodiversity, we came with the problem challenge that compute power will be very limited. And this is a different problem for society of information. Brazil has 1% of all data centers of the world. That's half of Latin America. According to EAA numbers released this week, Brazil has 0.2% of the computational power. And it's not to say that Brazil or any other country needs to have its own capacity, its own compute power, but the idea is to access. There is a big challenge for access if you look for the Global North and the Global South bridge or other bridges you can do. This is why we suggest a global alliance for AI, what we call Gavi for AI. So if you're not familiar with Gavi, it's the Global Alliance for Vaccination. In 2000, they started to put countries and foundations together to purchase something that was very limited in the market. Same problem we see here with compute power. Might be energy, might be compute parts, but it's a limited supply of these elements to buy. So together, they could have 3 groups working. 1, that gets the money and makes sure everything is accountable. 2, that makes a technical definition of what they should buy. And 3, a group that decides on how to share, how to distribute whatever they're doing. Today, they are responsible for more than 1/3 of the vaccines purchased in the world yearly. They were able to breach the limited supply and were able to increase the access to vaccines. Is it the same for compute power? Some yes, some no. What are the lessons to be learned? What are the different approaches we have? So this is the intro. I will pass the word to the speakers. We have very different stakeholders here, which is the best approach to see the problem from different ways. So, Jason, let's start with you. Jason Slata is the Chief AI Digital and Innovation Officer at UNIDO. If you're not familiar with UNIDO, it's about industrial development, very important for the topic. Jason.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here today. Just very briefly, yes, my name is Jason Slater. I'm the Chief AI Innovation and Digital Officer for the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. We're an organization that's been around nearly 60 years now. We're a specialized UN agency with a very specific focus on how can we ensure a sustainable industrial development, also economic development for that matter. We have 3 very clear priorities right now that we are focusing on in the areas of sustainable supply chains, a world without hunger, and how can we support climate mitigation. And basically my job is to make sure that through AI innovation and digital, how can we support all of those as a cross-cutting initiative. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jason. We go now online. We go for Helena Estavillo Flores. She founded and leads the Centro I para la Sociedad del Futuro, a think tank that works to build the digital future in an ethical, responsible, and inclusive way. Helena, can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you very well. Hello.
So please introduce yourself very briefly, and then later we go for the 2 questions.
Introduce myself. Yes, of course. Yes. I lead the Centro I, as you told. This is an independent think tank, and we work to foster ethical digital technologies, inclusion, responsibility, and I myself have a long career in regulation, in public policy. I was regulator for telecommunications in Mexico, and also and I also have taught for many years. I'm an economist.
Thank you very much. I like very much to have economists in the panel. I'll move now to Ivy. Ivy Lau-Schinderwolf works in international policy and partnerships at OpenAI.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and for moderating and organizing this panel. My name is Ivy Lau-Schinderwolf. I am part of the Global Affairs team at OpenAI, based in our San Francisco headquarters. I wear two hats. One of them is I coordinate our work in growth markets, and that means Africa, Latin America, and APAC. And the other hat I wear is I help lead our multilateral engagements. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, Ivy. So now for the fourth participant, Alison O'Byrne is the Director of International Telecommunications and Internet Policy in the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development in the Government of Canada.
Thanks so much. I have a hideously long title. It's mostly because of our department name, so you did very well there. Hi, folks. Alison O'Byrne. As mentioned, I'm the Director for International Telecoms and Internet Policy for our little team within our what is equivalent to the Industry Department in the Government of Canada. We have responsibilities for both the ITU and for Internet Governance files for Government of Canada, and it's a role that I've actually been in for just under a year now. So this is my first IGF, and I am delighted to be able to experience it live and in person after hearing about how great this forum is for many years. I had previously spent about 5 years in our same industry department working on AI policy, so this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart for sure.
Thank you. And you know, Canada was one of the first countries to jump in the AI regulation arena. Okay. So let's move to our first question. What are the key geopolitical and technical barriers preventing equitable access to computational power for AI development? And how can international cooperation in particular help to address them? So what are the barriers we have to achieve access? Jason, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. I guess a few things from what we see here at in terms of AI computing power, this is really concentrated in only a few nations right now. I think it's roughly around 30, primarily in US and China, etc. And the way that I want to tackle this is really by looking at it from UNIDO's perspective: is who are the member states that we are primarily trying to support, and where do we see this digital divide or AI computing divide? So we can, if we look at Africa, for example, we still see there that well, roughly globally, there's nearly 3 billion still unconnected. Yes. This is a huge challenge. You see in Africa alone that in terms of AI and digital tools, the adoption's in the region of 25%. So for me, one is, of course, in terms of you thinking about computing power, and we have what we call these compute deserts, where we have these zones where there's just simply no connectivity. We also have to see it from how do we ensure adoption? How do we also look at it from a skills perspective? So there is a huge skills gap that we're seeing right now. And again, if I look at Africa in particular, but there's some positive news, and I think we'll come to that later, yeah, when my fellow panelists have had a chance to speak. So those are some of the barriers that we are seeing right now. Now, one of the things, this has been framed very clearly by the Global Digital Compact that was endorsed last September in the United Nations General Assembly. I was very fortunate to be there at the ceremony that was celebrating us coming together under the Pact for the Future. And one of my actual roles in the UN is, and that's what I would use as a call for action today, is I'm vice chairing objective number 2 on an inclusive digital economy, which closely links to objective number 5 on AI. So mine is that we know what those challenges are, which challenges convert themselves into the barriers, and how can we then switch that into a much more positive and solution mode. And I'll hold back on that because I think later on I'd like to talk about some of the things not only we're doing, but with our private sector partners and other stakeholders we're putting in place. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jason. So Finland has a very good experiences on quantum computing and the challenge to share. And the topics you bring also bring us very closely to meaningful connectivity, which is an interesting way to see the problem from 10 years ago to today. So I move now to Ivy.
Yeah, I keep thinking about the way, the phrase, equitable access and what the barriers are. And I actually want to like take a step back and think about like just barriers to access, period. And what comes to mind, and I think it's important to like take a moment to think about the gap between supply and demand that everyone faces. It's actually, we have received a lot of outreach from countries with the question of how much demand there really is. Like, do we actually, we have this idea that we need GPUs, but how much do we really need it? Can you help us quantify? And to be honest, it is not a question we have thought a lot about until we have seen how fast our models have, the demand for our products have grown. When we launched ChatGPT in 2022 or 23, now I can't remember, seems like a long time ago, we thought it was a low-key research preview that nobody would use and pay attention to. But then we actually ended up having 100 million users in 1 month, and now we have 500 million weekly active users. And our CEO posted on X saying like our GPUs are melting, and a lot of people thought, oh my gosh, are they actually melting? No, they were not, but like we actually just have seen a huge inference demand. And that is not, we knew training models would involve a lot of GPUs, but even we ourselves have underestimated how much demand there will be on inference. And as we have seen, the cost has come down, and when the cost of serving these models come down, the demand and the use also went up. And when we plot it out in a model, we realize, oh no, we are not on a trajectory to meet the demands. And so even we ourselves in the US realize we need access to more GPUs. And that's why we launched Stargate, and why we launched OpenAI for countries. And I'll share more about that later, but I think I want to throw out the framing that like, yes, we should think about the divide and whether the access is equitable, but maybe if we can zoom out a little bit, the problem isn't just inequitable access. The problem is everyone needs more. How do we solve for the gap between supply and demand everywhere?
Thank you. And I like to think like Brazil. We need to prepare for 5G and no connectivity, and you have to take both paths together because we have both audiences. So I will go online now to Elena.
Oh, yes, thank you. I was also reflecting on the question because when we ask if we have enough access, maybe we're thinking that there is computational power, and the problem is how to access it or how to access it equitably. But in this aspect, we have the problem of not enough computational power. No, so it's a double question about meeting demand and supply, and then having the mechanisms so that everybody everybody in the interesting parties has this equitable access. So it's not just a case of making sure to access to something that exists, but how to produce it. And then we have many barriers that keep just reinforcing themselves. And I'm thinking mostly of Latin America, the case that I know better, because we don't have enough access to basic infrastructure, to services, to capacity in those services now for final users. But then this comes over all of this, the companies, the scientists, the academia, the startups that could produce more services, more AI. They have this barrier because there's not enough compute power so that they can develop the AI that is focused on the region, culture, needs, ways of deciding on how to use and how to use AI for which needs, for which problems to solve. So this is just something, it's like a circle that keeps reinforcing itself. And I see something that it's something that makes me reflect on who makes the necessary investments so that there is more compute power in some countries than in others. And it's very clear that, for example, in the US, mainly investment in compute power comes from companies. This is private investment that is oriented to the market, and we don't see the same dynamics in many of our countries in Latin America, and we expect much of the investment coming from governments, but governments have not enough resources for these huge investments that we would need, and so that's where this idea of collaborating for producing this infrastructure, this computing infrastructure, regionally, well, this is very attractive because individually governments don't have these resources, but also it comes to questioning us if this will be enough. We need the other side of the investment side from the private sector. So we also have to work on that. And also we can think of collaborative efforts, but bringing together the private sector so that we can gather these sufficient resources coming from only the governments. I don't think that those will be sufficient.
Elena, thanks very much for a contribution. Alison, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep my comments relatively brief because I think my colleagues have done a very good job of covering the ground so far. Maybe just to raise a couple of other things. I think we've talked a little bit about, and I really want to pick up on what Elena was talking about with regard to the sort of regional and the geographic differences in terms of access, I think is one of the major challenges that we're facing. Recognizing that particularly for sort of emerging economies for the global south, there are cost issues that can be associated with, developing or establishing compute capacity, that the cost of creating compute capacity is not the same in every region, that there are issues that come to infrastructure, that come to latency that already exists that have to be addressed in order to be able to establish compute capacity. There's also, I want to acknowledge, as I think Elena did as well, that there's a real concentration of the current compute capacity in the hands of a very few providers who have incentives because of the scale of the demand and because of their proximity, have incentives to really focus on sort of North American and Western European markets. So with those barriers that I think various folks on the panel have talked about, the one thing that I want to note is that the real challenge that we face is that some of those barriers are not only complex, but they're compounding, they're self-perpetuating. So as folks are left behind and as there's a lacking compute capacity, or in some cases lacking infrastructure, or in some cases even lacking demand side, like we talked about, lacking skills or lacking awareness of the necessity of compute power, those that are already behind the game are going to be left further and further behind, because as the demand increases in those places that already have compute capacity, we're going to see just a continuation of response to that instead of a more equitable approach. So I think that's, as Elena said, a place where governments, and particularly where international discussions and international dialogues are critical, because you can't rely sort of on market forces to be able to correct for that need for equity and access.
Thank you, Alison. And I think you remember that the legacy of the digital divide keeps going, and then we have new challenges and the old challenge altogether.
Exactly.
So I'll go for the second question of the panel. What lessons can be drawn from global public goods initiatives, such as Gavi, that I mentioned before? Lessons to design a multilateral framework that ensures fair distribution of compute resources needed for AI development. So, Jason, we start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a lot of positives that we can look at that. I mean, when you talk about multilateral or multi-stakeholder frameworks, we actually launched a similar thing already near 2 years ago now. It's known as AI for Manufacturing. It's a global alliance. And what the purpose of this is that as a UN agency, that you act as a trusted advisor, if you like, to convene and bring together stakeholders. We have around 140 members now from over 40 countries, and it's a complete mix of academia, think tanks, private sector. We've got people such as Google, Huawei, imagining those two sitting around the table. And what is it that they're trying to do is to see and identify how we can leverage AI that can support manufacturing, primarily in those countries that we want to support. So these are, developing or middle-income countries. So in terms of how Gavi and what he did in bringing together this framework, I think there's a lot of positives that one can see in it. I just see from the perspective of what we're doing around this AIM Global Alliance, not to be confused with the title, is we want to make it much more solution-orientated. So when we talk around here now of digital divide, of lack of skills, let's understand where we need to deploy such solutions, etc. So really become much more solution-orientated. We hear enough about the problems that are going on. In the title here, we're talking about geopolitical issues. We in the UN are fully understanding that right now. But let's get on the front foot, yeah? Because we do know that there are gaps. We know, for example, when we talk about computing power, we know where there are challenges right now when it comes to growing a tomato and getting a tomato in Kenya to the market, and how 20% of that is lost. And here is perfect use case for how AI can help it. So for me, bringing all those stakeholders together, from the people who need, all the way those who provide, and frankly from the UN to have this convening role that actually is a trusted advisor, is a phenomenal thing that we can learn based on the experiences of what happened with Gavi and that scheme before. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And I love that you bring the tomato from Kenya, because it moves away from the prompting user normal that resembles rural areas, manufacturing, intermediaries, sustainability, and others.
I'm going to talk about coffee as well in a few minutes as well.
Okay, wait. So, Elena, do you want to go next?
Yes, of course. About lessons, I think that we have many lessons. One of how that an inclusive governance model works very well in the sense that decisions were not solely shaped by some small group of nations, of wealthier nations, or a small group of corporate interests, but that there were many multi-stakeholders just looking at a meaningful participation for these different actors. And civil society also played a very critical role in bringing transparency, in monitoring, and keeping this equity in central to this monitoring, and making sure that decision making was very aware of the need to ensure that distribution was fair. So we can learn from that in that if we get to build this collaboration, that compute distribution will be not only looking at technical efficiency, but also on socially fairness to distribute it and to give access to this computing power. Also of being very aware of the importance of having corrective mechanisms to address historic inequality. So in these mechanisms that have to be designed, that we bring the factors of correcting and to bringing local institutions and research ecosystems to engage continually with these systems, so that it's not only of bringing technology or shipping in equipment to build the centers, but to really understand how compute is used for which needs, and that local institutions and organizations are deciding on this.
Thank you, Elena. And thank you for bringing the researchers and universities, again, to the topic. And I like the position you made from a technical solution to a fairness solution. It's very difficult to define what fairness is, but it's certainly something we have to pursue and define. So I like it very much. Ivy, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of hard to go after, Elena, and that was a very, very good point and compelling. OpenAI is just one company in this big world and this ecosystem. But I think we will share what we see from our own vantage point and experience. I think what I couldn't agree with more from both the Gavi example and what my co-panelists have shared is the importance of working across sectors. And what I mean by that is we as a single company, for example, have learned from our Stargate experience that definitely could not be accomplished by one party alone. And let me just maybe take a moment to explain what Stargate is and who is involved in it and why that is that convinced me that this has to be a multi-stakeholder solution. So Stargate is a $500 billion infrastructure project, essentially, over the next 4 years. And we have started building data centers in Abilene, Texas. And this is who and how it all came together. Like Gavi, there is one group of partners that are technology and operations focused. So that includes OpenAI, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Oracle, ARM. And then we need another group of partners that can be finance focused. And for us, in this case, for Stargate, is SoftBank. They take up the financing responsibility. And the third group, very much like Gavi, how the responsibilities are distributed and structured, is the political side. This is something we are working with state governments on. And it extends to what we do internationally. And this is what we have talked to the U.S. government about. And I think another possibility I want to posit here is we have heard from a lot of countries that like what they really, really want, or they're not mutually exclusive. I think they want to make sure there is access to the benefits that compute and compute-enabled models bring. And so in addition to thinking about infrastructure, we are also therefore very focused on how we can make access to the solutions that compute enable available. And that's why when we launched OpenAI for countries, it is not copy-paste Stargate everywhere. It actually is much more expansive than that. We think about how we work with different education partners, universities, schools, how we increase AI literacy. So we're not just investing on the stuff, the hardware, right? We're investing in people as well. We make our products freely available. We have a partnership with WhatsApp. So in low connectivity settings, people can still access the benefits of intelligence that compute enables. And all of that is something that, like as one company, this is what we're thinking about doing. But we also know that we need funding partners. We need operations partners, technology partners, political partners, very much like Gavi, so that this is something we can coordinate and offer to the world from very different levels of the stack, at the infrastructure level, at the solutions level, and at like even like a people level, so that we are, as a society, evolving along with the technology.
Thank you. And that reminds me that bridging the compute power might or might not involve localities. So we can process data remotely. We have done. Brazil has a partnership with Spain for supercomputers. Finland has one. Estonia, I reckon, has one as well. So we can solve problems where the energy is a possibility, where water is a possibility, but also where the supply and demand, it's another part of the scale and can be achieved. Thank you. So I move now to the third question of the panel. So how can Global South nations shape AI governance and infrastructure policies to reduce dependence of foreign compute providers and build sustainable local AI capacity? What lessons can be learned from the DeepSeek case or other cases that kind of rephrase it, how we ask questions about computational power? Jason, you want to start?
No. No, thank you. I'm still wanting to answer the previous question.
Tell us about coffee. Tell us about the coffee.
Shall I? Can I? Yeah, because that may be something that can be, I think it's actually very relevant to this when you're talking about the Global South. So I talked about tomatoes before. What we did last year on the sidelines of the General Assembly, we basically built what we call a lighthouse solution. It links to AI. It was a consortium of two governments, so Italy, Ethiopia, Ili, Lavazza, Google, with one of its implementing partners, Engis, and an international coffee organization. What was it we were trying to solve? There's roughly around 3 billion cups of coffee drank a day.
Wow.
Ethiopia is the 5th largest coffee producer. It's the #1 coffee producer in Africa. And there's a new EU directive being issued called deforestation. And so the challenge was, how can you leverage AI and digitalization to support coffee farmers? Yeah, so that's why we built this consortium and brought everybody together. So again, back to the Gavi example, the AIM Global, this was a very specific one. And there's many, many other examples. That's why it links nicely to what you mentioned with Stargate. It's a use case where people came together because you could not possibly solve it as a UN agency or individually. So that was the coffee example. We brought it together. We have a solution. We went to Addis. We actually met and presented this to the Coffee Farmers Association themselves. They didn't like it. We had McKinsey present. Didn't like it. Why? Because they didn't understand the incentive. Our land is not subjected to deforestation. Only 2%. So, but when one understands that in order to comply with this directive, that it opens up opportunities along the supply chain, that openly is about, increasing productivity and what have you, then we tapped into the real incentive behind it. So that's another thing when we know that there are, when you talk about the usages, etc., and GPUs and what have you, I think about there's so many faces out there where they don't yet know how AI and digitalization is going to support them. So that was the coffee example. Where are we now, 12 months on? We are now looking to see whether we can actually implement and pilot that within Ethiopia. In addition to that, that consortium are opening up an AI initiative in Italy, bringing those examples together, primarily in the area of coffee. So that was the specific example. I'll answer this question later, if I may.
So I think I like very much the coffee example because it's hands-on. And in deforestation, we bring the AI and climate close to each other.
Yeah.
So you have wonderful uses for mapping deforestation, mapping disasters, predicting climate, and many other things. And if you do it together, if you have elements of it that are open, that can be shared, it certainly is an asset for global climate change. So, Elena, could you go next?
Yes. Well, Ivy already said about something that I wanted to focus on, in the importance of investing in people, in investing in local talent, and not just thinking of the hardware, and supporting community-driven research, because countries are innovating despite these infrastructure gaps, and this I find this very interesting. Something that we always are repeat, in Mexico, but that I believe that it is true of many other countries, is that given that we don't have many resources, so then we have managed to develop ingenuity and contextual intelligence to find solutions with very limited resources. And I see that this is happening also in AI development, that we look at researchers, small developers in civil society that are experimenting, and they are using open source and small scales, hybrid models, and finding interesting developments. So I think that this is something to learn from, and these are opportunities. And if this ingenuity is met with more infrastructure, but because we definitely need it, and we can find these collaborative ways to find this infrastructure, then there is an opportunity, to meeting ingenuity with infrastructure. And also, I find another thing that I find very interesting is that these regions of the world, like Latin America, are pushing for more plural and justice-centered vision of AI, and also where we emphasize not only individual but collective rights. And this can also help us build governance, a strong governance for AI, and reshaping this AI, this governance for AI in a way that protects these different models of innovation and different models of protecting individual and collective rights.
Thank you, Elena. And you remind me of how, from the Global South, we just have to be creative. With scarce resources, we just have to hack it. We just have to make it happen. If we level up the opportunities, for sure we're going to have better results. So, Ivy, do you want to go next?
Sure. All this talk of infrastructure just reminded me that when I first landed in Oslo airport and then took the train to the city, I was like, wow. Like, when trains work, it is an amazing experience, and it is such great utility, and I wish my home city of San Francisco would offer the same thing. And I mentioned that example because I think when we talk about chips and compute, sometimes it just, we might think of it as a different category as other infrastructure that have built cities and nations. And when you ask the question, Fabro, about what to do about that lack of access, I think it's kind of how we think about what everyone can do about the gap in supply and demand. How can we solve for the problem of access to the infrastructure and the problem of access to the benefits of infrastructure? If we can't access to the infrastructure to the same degree, is there a creative way to access the benefits? And I want to maybe offer two more things in addition to talking about data centers. One is, I think it's important to incentivize and cultivate a vibrant local startup ecosystem. If you have chips and you have maybe some people who know how to use a tool, but there aren't entrepreneurs, and if you don't incentivize and really cultivate that growth, then I feel like we're not really facilitating access. We're not facilitating innovation. We're not facilitating access to the benefits of the technology. So I think that is really important. It's like one of the prongs of what we offer when we say we were launching OpenAI for countries. And then the other thing is kind of touching on what Elena also mentioned and what I said earlier about like investing in people. We launched OpenAI Academy earlier this year, and we are just starting to scale. And if you haven't seen, some of our videos online already, I encourage you to do that. We have produced them, we've been in production every week. And they are for all sectors, and they're all for all skills levels. And sometimes, we offer in-person events as well. And the main point here is not like, look, there are more free videos to watch. There are, and like we're proud to say that we have trained 1.4 million people already. But I think like when we think about access, there needs to be like a very concrete way to apply the technology, and we can't do that if we don't actually know what it is and what to do that with. I'm excited that when we move from day 0 to day 1, or maybe day 1 to day 2, to be fair about all the progress we have seen already, that there will be a much more sophisticated and maybe even demanding like approach to like how we use the compute and the tools that the compute empower, and not just talking about like the stuff itself.
Thanks, Ivy. You reminded me that prompting brings humans able to easily talk to computers. So when you have descriptive AI, you usually need a team of technicians to code something so you use the result. When we have generative AI, we regain this capacity to being a normal user, to make use of technology, which brings the issue of supply and demand to a great stress, because now we have way more need for technologies and uses. So, Alison?
Yeah, sure, thanks. I think the question really is about how we include Global South voices in conversations around AI. And I will continue to make it a policy not to tell the Global South how to do policy. But I will say that I think that one of the effective ways that we ensure that we have voices from the Global South in the conversation, and it really reflects back on what Elena was talking about in the Gavi model, is ensuring that we have a multi-stakeholder approach, and one that thinks about including a whole range of different potential partners. So when we're talking about something like, a global alliance for artificial intelligence, we have to think about ensuring that we're talking to large and to small providers and users. We have to think about talking about both public and private space. Like, it has to be the big AI institutions, the accelerators, the startups, the governments all coming into the conversation together. That'll be the most effective way for us to be able to make progress on ensuring equitable access to what's needed for compute capacity. I'm going to give a little plug to a Canadian initiative in this regard because I can't be stopped. What we have from our International Development Research Centre in Canada, IDRC, are working with the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office that have committed sort of $10 million to the development of an equal compute network that strives to do exactly this. So strives to bring together a number of different partners and a number of different types of partners to think about equitable access to compute capacity. And one of the things that the network really hopes to achieve is by bringing together a number of different sort of partners from the Global South together, it allows to the possibility to kind of create a critical mass in order to obtain sort of better rates and better processes as they're looking to establish compute capacity. When you have a number of different countries or a number of different institutions who are speaking together, they have greater power together than they can each individually have on their own. And that's sort of the value of both the international or the global alliance model and also of the multi-stakeholder model. So it's a nice little Canadian piece we've got.
Yeah, I like the Canadian piece. We have time for one last question. And one thing I like about Gavi is that they have a political group on how to share the assets. So imagine you buy 100 units of something, and they will have to chip in, contribute, find consensus on how to share. So in the case of Gavi, part of it will go for countries that can pay for vaccines. So the model is sustainable. Part of the vaccines will go to countries that cannot pay for vaccines, so there's access. Part goes to countries that are doing an effort to be more sustainable or to produce vaccines, and so on. And all of these are political questions that address the issue on how to share. So if you can purchase, you can buy, finance. If you know what we are buying, if it is a commodity that we can have it, there's a political group that will decide on how to share it, and multi-stakeholder seems like a good approach to do that. So I'll go for the last question. So you can advance in one of the points that you made. Jason, for example, said a call to action in the first question if you want to bring back. If you want to bring from tomatoes to coffee to something else, feel free. And if in case you have questions, I have further questions for you. So Jason, what would you like to expand?
No, thank you. Well, linking it to what you just mentioned there, Gavi, we have, as I see, a global digital compact in place, a pact for the future. We have a very clear way forward with those objectives. So that's my first. That is a multi-stakeholder approach. That was governments, that was tech, that was academia. We all came together. We're nearly 12 months in, and there's momentum. We, under the objective number 2, regarding digital economy, which links to objective 5 AI, have a very clear call for solutions, a call for action. In that, it links to what I mentioned before. We already have an alliance, a global alliance on AI for manufacturing, which has actually 3 pillars to it, which is one around smart manufacturing, which is not so much about tomatoes and coffee, but it's when it starts to get a bit harder, you know, on the shop floor, and how can you infuse AI in the production process. Then we have our AI Lighthouse solutions that I just mentioned. The example I gave was the one around coffee. We're also building up around other products. I'm hoping we collaborate with OpenAI, by the way. And the third component, and that, as I mentioned, is around digital economy that links it directly back. So our mandate in UNIDO is to make sure that we implement what is being committed under the GDC. And last but not least, there's a point that Elena mentioned before that I also didn't, that I mentioned, and you also mentioned in terms of regulation around 4G, 5G, etc. coming in, is this open innovation. We also have this program that supports that again it's not a UNIDO program, it's an open one that we convene. We bring together, it's multi-stakeholder around innovation. How can you help those great ideas, those startups, those innovators, and bring corporates together as well? And importantly, investment. There is a clear funding requirement here. We come and go, projects end, but then so what? So that's basically what I just wanted to mention, is in terms of this multi-stakeholder around the GDC, the AIM Global and those components, I also think, as you mentioned there about this model for Gavi, we are also trying to make sure there is a sustainable model in place that ensures that these great ideas that's going to come becomes something that's investable and sustainable, so that it then can be ultimately replicated, not just in Ethiopia on coffee, but we can take it to Latin America. You know, tomatoes are grown in most places. How can we come to COP and ensure that we bring a solution in place that helps mitigate climate change? So that would be my call for action. Please, please join us, and we will do our utmost to promote the solutions that people are working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And I was in Bonn last week for the SB 62, and the issue of how to use technology to advance climate agenda and how to make technology greener is top of mind. Maybe will be a big theme for COP30 this year. So, Elena, moving to you, I think we share the challenges of talking from the civil society point of view. And it's always an interesting point of view because we're not government, we're not companies, we're kind of bringing issues to the debate. So, what topic would you like to advance?
What topic? Well, governance, we have been talking about governance, and we, but we are supposing that the system already exists. And we also need to create and to maintain the necessary incentives to create the model and then to sustain it. You know, and one of it is to produce a model that is credible, that brings certainty, and so that people trust it. No, the people trust it, and then we have this necessary. Well, yes, the trust to keep it together and to keep investment coming, and the countries that invest in it also need the right combination of incentives to continue dedicating resources for this, and this should come from different expectations. One is to have a fair share of benefits from the model, and also to by the means of trust and credibility, to keep believing, in this model that is bringing benefits to the region and benefits for inclusive development and sustainable development. And that's why I believe that the role of civil society as a component of this governance that produces trust and credibility is so important.
Thank you. This reminds me that usually governments have AI national plan for development. If I'm right, OECD Observatory ranked 81 countries that have a plan of action for AI. Brazil just released it last month. And one key thing is what kind of pillars we have in this development. So what Elena brings is that it needs to be multi-stakeholder. What you bring is that it needs to have open innovation. It has to be shared. And this is really interesting. So I go to you. I think one interesting point of view is that companies are very different from each other. So we think of them like double decks or something like that, but they're very different. The Americans are very different from the Europeans, very different from Chinese. And if you look at one country, they're very different. And all of them are trying to bring solutions for bridging the compute power from the perspective. So what point would you like to advance?
Thank you for framing it that way, because I was sitting here thinking, I really am not qualified to tell other people what to do, right? Like, we're just one company. I can't tell what governments what to do, what other companies to do, and what all of Global South should do, right? But from the perspective of just one company based in San Francisco, what I think I want to, the one call to action, so to speak, is let's use this technology to build tools to solve hard problems. I think, I don't know if everyone has to worry about getting chips the same way. If all of us can get the benefits to the chips the same way. And as one company, what we are trying to do to accomplish that end is to make our tools accessible. So that's why, that's why we have, like I mentioned earlier, an integration with WhatsApp so that it's workable even in low connectivity settings. We are rolling out open weights models later this summer. And you mentioned the Brazil AI plan. And two of the examples that were mentioned in that plan were Favela GPT and Amazon GPT. Favela, we made the tool usable in a lot of favelas, and we also have a partnership with the university and Amazon so that our tool is enabling conservation and health insights that are already helping residents, and just to help preserve the largest rainforest on the planet. And this is the kind of story that really excites me. That there is so much more to come, and that progress is, it's happening today, right now. And so let's think about how we use what exists and what is to come, and to solve hard problems and advance the benefits of LLMs.
Thanks, Ivy. And if you are online and want to post the questions, or if you are in the audience, please make a queue. After Alison's contributions, we're going to open the floor for participation.
Perfect, thanks. I think really following on from Ivy's point, I think that there is something very important to be said for international action to support equitability of access to compute capacity. I think that there's a recognition, even among those who already sort of have good access to compute, there's a recognition of the value of sort of sovereign abilities or sovereign access to compute capacity, even in kind of Western Europe and North America. And so it's understandable that the Global South also ought to be able to play into that ecosystem, that there also ought to be an equitability of access there. But going beyond equitability of compute access, I think it's also true that if we don't have AI tools that are designed responsibly and that respond to the needs of local communities, access is not going to be sufficient. So having access to compute capacity doesn't mean anything if we think about equitability of access, we also have to be thinking about equitability of designing AI systems and tools that are free from bias, that reflect linguistic diversity, that are climate conscious in the way that they're created. And then equitability of use as well, designing AI tools that protect the individuals that are really looking to seek the benefits of the use of artificial intelligence, that protect workers, that support development purposes, and that have benefits beyond kind of a small group that would already have access to kind of privileges in that regard. So I think really, as we think about equitability of access, it has to be part of a broader conversation about equitability in the design and the use of AI systems as well.
Thank you, Alison. Let me check if there is anyone online or in the audience that want to make a comment. No? I'll check here. So we go for a last question. And I think that I like the climate agenda and the relationship with it. And what you bring, Alison, is that compute power is the start of it, and the governments will have a huge role on how to control it or make it safer, make it more secure, and they have to relate. And there's a huge challenge now for climate, which was a problem already, now is a bigger problem. So as concluding remarks, Jason, what would you like to highlight or call to action?
I just underline what we've all, in our different aspects, been saying about is, collaboration is absolutely critical in this moment now around AI, understanding what the needs of it are, what the computing power of it is, making sure that we don't leave the global south, that the divide doesn't get bigger, etc. So my final comment would just be that let's join this alliance. Because as Stargate mentioned by Ivy, as what's going on now with the AI factory that's being opened up in South Africa, collaboration between NVIDIA and Cassava, what's going on in Italy, what's happening in the country. I just left a few hours ago in Austria with the AI Gigafactory. It is a consortium of people that's coming together. And yes, taking all of those components around the ethics of AI, making sure that it is equitable, that it is transparent, it's inclusive, it's collaborative, it's reliable, it's safe, and it ensures privacy. Privacy was a big issue on the coffee example. I didn't mention that before. So that would be my final one, is just I could not underline any further than what we've all collectively said on all those various levels. All I would offer is, from perspective of UNIDO, we do have a platform in place. I don't say we're happy to help and to support and join forces. Thank you.
Thank you. Elena, do you want to go for concluding remarks or highlights?
Yes, of course, and I will build upon on the same ideas because these technologies have tend to concentrate, tend to build a scale. So countries, smaller countries, or countries that have smaller access to resources, have to collaborate to attain enough scale to be part of the movement. Otherwise, we will have bigger gaps in our development, and so this collaboration, I believe, that is a must right now, just to bridge gaps and to change this mode of development that has produced so many persistent gaps that will get wider. So that's why collaboration has to be the new mode of development.
Thank you. And I hope collaboration sparks for the Global Alliance from what is happening, from could happen just outside of here. So, Ivy, do you want to go for the concluding remarks?
At the risk of just repeating myself and other people, I will actually still say there's something maybe to the trifecta of political, financial, and technical/operational partners as the way we think about who should be at the table. So, and I think that is necessary in all countries and in all fora, and so that we can truly collaborate and take into account all the equities, because we're talking about a really a massive scale of infrastructure and a massive potential of transformation.
Thank you. Alison?
Thank you. Always dangerous to go last for the whole thing. I think I want to build on the idea of collaboration, which I think a lot of us have talked about today, and I think is super valuable as we're discussing how to kind of encourage that sort of equitable access to the benefits of artificial intelligence. And one thing that I want to build on that concept of collaboration, at the risk of being controversial, is the need for collaboration to be in a spirit of openness and in a spirit of listening. And it doesn't matter what kind of equitability challenge we're talking about, whether it's the sort of global South's compute access, whether we're talking about linguistic diversity in the internet or in AI, whether we're talking about in Canada, Indigenous connectivity and Indigenous data sovereignty. When we are in these equitability conversations and when we are thinking about how we collaborate with partners, one of the biggest challenges that we see is that, and governments are not immune to this, we will often come to the table in a spirit of collaboration, meaning here's my idea and everyone must agree with it in order for us to collaborate. And I think there really needs to be, in a space like AI, where the technology is evolving and where our understanding of the capacities and the understanding of the benefits is evolving, we have to come in a spirit of listening and openness and in a spirit of compromise as well. If we want to have collective action, we are going to have compromise, and we are going to have a recognition of the needs of others and a recognition that we don't always understand the needs of folks who are outside our own context and our own community. So I think that is one of, like, if I have a call to action, it really is to come to collaboration in a spirit of sometimes recognizing that maybe your own positioning is wrong or that you need to adjust your own approach in order to be able to meet the needs of other communities. If we're not able to do that, then we won't be able to take collective action on these equitability issues, and they can't be solved without collective action.
Thank you. So with this, I'll do some concluding remarks and end the panel. I started the panel wondering if there is a need for a global alliance, and yes, not the global alliance, but many are global alliances, a diversity of global alliances. And the global alliances, they'll have shared problems, but also different communities. So they need to find this collaboration according to their communities. Maybe the community of IGF is different from COP, which is different from G20 and so on. And collaboration is really important. I still hope that we can increase the access to compute power in the Global South somehow, either installing compute power locally, or sharing compute power. I still hope that we can share compute powers amongst countries and in a collaboration. So Brazil has a collaboration with Spain, for example, for supercomputers. And I still hope that the issue of information society becomes enhanced by this access to a technology that can be transformative but can also place risks and challenges. So thank you very much for the participation, and we conclude.